When you know what to expect, you're a lot less likely to give up on yourself, get frustrated because you're not quote unquote there yet. And as a result, you're more likely to experience food freedom faster than when you have no idea what the journey is going to look like. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Happy Wednesday, or whatever day of the week that you are listening to this podcast. Thank you for being here. And today I'm going to talk about what to expect as you learn to become an intuitive eater. More specifically, I'm going to outline the 5 stages that you will go through that almost 99.9% of people who become intuitive eaters will go through after a history or a past of chronic dieting, disordered eating, or an unhealthy relationship with food. So if you're someone who maybe you listen to podcasts just like this one on intuitive eating, or you follow intuitive eating accounts on social media, and you kind of gather all of these different pieces of information and you try to piece it all together and it all makes sense for you, and maybe you're like, amazing, food freedom, let me bring all of these foods back in because now I can eat whatever I want whenever I want, right? That's what intuitive eating tells me that I can do. And maybe you've tried to become an intuitive eater on your own and it felt really out of control and you didn't know if you were doing the right thing because you felt even further away from when you first started, from when you were dieting, and maybe you overate more now that you had this freedom. And there's a good chance that you had no clear understanding of what the path is going to look like. I don't know about you, but I have the type of personality who really likes knowing all of the details. I have a lot of anxiety about the future. I'm constantly living like 5 to 10 years ahead. And I like to feel like I can control things. And I actually tend to attract in Food Freedom Academy, the type of clients that we have, a lot of them are like these type A perfectionist control freaks. And I say that with a lot of love in my heart. And it's normal, especially when you are so used to like trying to control food. The way you do one thing is often the way that you do most things. And so it's very normal to kind of transmute this need for control around food to this need for control around becoming an intuitive eater. So what I always do when we start inside the program, inside Food Freedom Academy, the very first week, we have a kickoff call. So we have a kickoff coaching call where all of the members get to meet each other, and I'm there as well. And I take them through exactly what to expect, not only inside of the program and the resources and how to make the most of it, but also what to expect on their intuitive eating journey and what it's going to look like, because you're going to go through different stages. It's not going to happen overnight that you're going to go from like being an exhausted chronic dieter to being an intuitive eater. There's going to be stages in between. And what I always hear from my clients inside FFA is that just being able to see it outlined is so helpful because they can see the path forward. Because imagine I'm a big hiker and I'm also really terrible with directions. I always get lost. So let's say that I'm going on a hike and I'm in a forest and I have been walking for like hours at this point, and I didn't have a map. And I didn't actually know if I was close to the top, close to the peak, close to being done, or if I was going in the completely wrong direction and I was actually just making my path longer and I could be walking for like hours more. Then if I'm in that forest, if I'm doing that hike and I have no map, no path, of course, I'm going to feel really frustrated because now I don't know where I'm going and I don't know if I'm close or if I'm far or if I'm even on the right track. But let's say that I'm on this same hike, but now I have a map. I'm using All Trails, for example, or I have a GPS. And yes, I have been walking for a long time, but I also know exactly where I'm going and I know where the peak is going to be and I know when I'm going to be done and I have a really good idea of what the rest of my hike is going to look like. Then I'm not going to feel as confused and as lost and as frustrated by the fact that I've been walking for so long or not even knowing where I am. So my biggest hope for you, since you're listening to this podcast, I know it's because you're committed and you're serious about becoming an intuitive eater and having a healthy relationship with food and leaving dieting behind once and for all. If you weren't that person, you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast, but you might have no idea what that's even going to look like for you. And I want to give you that ease of mind. So today I'm going to be walking you through the 5 stages that you will go through on your journey to become an intuitive eater. And these stages are the stages that were defined and outlined by the original intuitive eating dietitians, Evelyn Tripoli and Elise Resch. And as I've been working with hundreds of clients inside FFA, I have seen this for myself. I've seen my clients go through these stages and nothing brings me more joy, especially around stage 3, is when it starts to solidify and there's more trust and there's more intuition and there's more belief. And it's so beautiful to see. So I'm going to take you through those 5 stages. And I want you to understand as well is that your journey back to intuitive eating, and I say back to intuitive eating because you might not believe this, but you were an intuitive eater at one point in your life. You were born as an intuitive eater. Chances are you didn't come out of the womb counting calories or afraid to eat carbs. All of the behaviors and the mindsets that you've developed around food were a product of your environment and of your culture, of diet culture. So your journey back to who you really are, to what is part of you, what is innate inside of you, will depend on different factors. Like how long it will take you to get to stage 5 will depend on how long you've been dieting or how deep your diet mentality is, how willing you are to trust the process, the amount of support that you have as you go through this. So I'm not going to talk about specific timelines of like, it's going to take you 4 weeks to get to stage 2, because it really will depend on all of those factors. And the more people I work with, the more I see trends. And I would say that the biggest factor that influences your journey and how fast you go or how much progress you make and how much transformation and change you're able to experience, the biggest factor is how willing they are to trust the process, how willing they are to go all in and be coachable and absorb everything like a sponge without thinking, oh, well, I know better, or I already knew that. For example, I have a member who just joined Food Freedom Academy, and when she first joined, she was so skeptical and so filled with fear and self-doubt, which is a very common theme. Like this was nothing new, especially when you have a long history of diet failures. You feel like a failure. You think that nothing's ever going to work for you. So she was like filled with self-doubt. she enrolled, she got in, she started going through some of the materials and the videos and the trainings and doing the worksheets. And then we had a call together a few weeks later, and we got on the call, and she had been so incredibly coachable. It was amazing to see. She had a notebook. She had done the worksheets. She told me, she was like, I made this decision and I'm going to go all in on this. Like, I am going all in. I am trusting the process. And I knew right then and there, she's going to like blow it out of the water. She is going to experience like life-changing transformations throughout this program. And that was because she is going all in. She is ready to be coachable. She is ready to take direction. And that is like really one of the biggest pieces, is how coachable you are. And this is something that I know for myself. I've been part of so many coaching programs, and some of them have been like very big investments for me. And if I'm going to invest like $15,000, $20,000 into a program, then why would I go in there and not be coachable? If I'm paying someone who I see as an expert, who is going to give me the tools and the strategies in order to achieve my goals, then I'm going to go in as like a blank slate. So I just want you to keep this in mind about, the stages that you're going to go through. A lot of it will be dependent on just like surrendering and trusting the process, because there's one thing that is, very clear about intuitive eating, is that it's possible for everyone, absolutely everyone. But the biggest, like the caveat, I guess you could say, is it's possible for everyone who's willing to do what it takes, who's willing to trust the process, who's willing to let go of the past and really move forward. And when you understand these stages, it's going to help you understand where you're at and why some of the things that you maybe have been experiencing, like if you've gone through the honeymoon phase where foods that before you were restricting now are like super exciting to you because you can have them back in your life and you think about those food all of the time, and maybe you're overeating foods. If you're experiencing this honeymoon phase, then understanding that that might be completely normal if you're in a certain stage. And when you know that, okay, what I'm experiencing right now is completely normal and it's just temporary. Like I experienced this in order to get to the next stage. And I know that things are going to evolve and are going to change over time. Like, this is not going to be how I feel around food forever. I don't know. It will give your nervous system and your subconscious, like fear-based brain, a sense of release and even like some sense of control that you know what it's going to look like. Now, one caveat before I go into these stages is that it's not necessarily going to be linear. It's not necessarily going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There could be a chance that, let's say you are at stage 2 and then maybe something happens or you get distracted or even just old beliefs and old behaviors come back and you come back to stage 1. And oftentimes that tends to happen. This regression does tend to happen when you're doing this on your own, because it's so much easier to fall back into your default patterns and behaviors when you have no accountability, you have no guidance, and you're not even sure if you're doing the right thing. So then you stress out and you like recoil back into your comfort zone, even if your comfort zone is not very comfortable. So that's like one of the biggest thing I would say about not knowing what the path is going to look like, is that it's much easier to give up on yourself and to think, this just doesn't work for me. I'm that one person who cannot become an intuitive eater, and then fall back into your old patterns of overeating and food guilt and food obsession and thinking about it all the time. And there's a reason why you started in the first place, right? You're already living with so much pain. The thing about our comfort zone is often it's very uncomfortable. So I would say that it's incredibly important to know these stages and what to expect, because if you don't, and you do start to believe that what you're doing is wrong and your behaviors are abnormal and you're doing the wrong thing, and maybe I should just go back to dieting, and that felt more safe and that felt more comfortable, it can be really destructive, because dieting and this diet mindset is what got you in this mess in the first place. And to go back to it is really like signing a contract to live the rest of your life as a slave to food, to live the rest of your life hating your body and not trusting yourself around eating, and always having to be dependent on other people, rules, meal plans to tell you how to eat, and really ultimately not have any of that freedom. So let's go into these 5 stages. And as I go through these stages, just start to pay attention and think about, okay, what stage am I at right now? And you might, you might be between 2 stages, but chances are there's going to be one that like stands out to you the most. So let's get into it. Stage number 1 is called diet rock bottom. So at this point, you are an exhausted dieter. You are aware that dieting doesn't work and that it has always failed. And hopefully you're also aware that you are not the failure, but dieting has failed you and have been set up to fail. At this point, you are tired of constantly thinking about what you should or shouldn't eat, what you can't or can't eat, and feeling controlled by food. You feel like food is the enemy, and you tend to overeat off limit or forbidden foods because you feel guilty. You maybe have no idea how to listen to your body. So you've lost touch of your biological hunger and your satiety signals, right? So you routinely eat past fullness and end up feeling uncomfortable and miserable and starting again on Monday, and you're tired of it. You might emotionally eat quite often. So you eat when you seek comfort or distraction or to numb your feelings. You have a very negative body image and low self-esteem, no confidence, and your self-talk is extremely critical. And most importantly, the biggest thing about this stage is that you've started to think about the future. And the thing about dieting is that it's very short-term thinking. Like, what can I do in the next 30 days? What can I do right now? Like, what's the best diet, the fad diet? And now in this diet rock bottom, you started to think about your future, like 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now, and thinking about yourself in old age. And you think about, is this really how I want to live the rest of my life in this endless diet cycle? You've seen what it's like, the gaining and the losing and the on the wagon and off the wagon. And do you want to keep living the rest of your life in this endless cyclical pattern? And probably the thought of that is extremely scary. And most people, not just in intuitive eating, but in all areas of life, will decide to make a change when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Because when you decide to become an intuitive eater, there's some discomfort along with it. You're having to relearn and unlearn a lot of mindsets and behaviors, and you're having to step out of your comfort zone. But when you hit diet rock bottom, the pain of staying the same, of being stuck like this in this food and body obsession for the rest of your life, is so much greater than the discomfort from learning how to become an intuitive eater and healing your relationship with food and your body. So really, when you're this exhausted dieter in stage 1, you are ready to go back to eating intuitively and healing your relationship with food. So that's stage 1. Moving on to stage 2. This is the conscious learning and pursuit of pleasure phase. So this is where you are what I like to call the conscious learner. So this is really a stage of discovery, of exploration, of, like it says in the name, conscious learning. So this is where, as I was explaining to Luke, my boyfriend, a couple of days ago, this is where you become hyper aware of everything that's going on in your body. You become hyper aware of your mentality around food, of your behaviors, of your preferences, of your hunger cues, your satiety cues. So I want you to think of this stage as, when you first started to learn how to drive a car, you got in the car and you were like super hyper aware of everything you were doing. Like, okay, is my seatbelt on? And is my mirror in the right place? And my seat? And you don't want to talk to anyone while you're driving because you're like super concentrated. Same for really any new skill. When you learn how to play a guitar, you're really concentrated. I used to be a synchronized swimmer, but similarly to like a dance, before you develop that muscle memory, you really have to think about it. So same goes for this conscious learning phase. In order to become an intuitive eater, think of it as like a skill that you're relearning. And at the beginning, when you're learning a new skill, there is going to be more awareness, more conscious awareness to it. And it might feel obsessive at first, but the difference is that it's not the same obsessive that you had with dieting, where it's filled with worry and stress and anxiety. Now it's filled with curiosity and non-judgment. And just like I always explain this to my clients, is like putting on a scientist hat and just gathering data as if this is an experiment. You're getting to learn about your body again. And that's such a beautiful thing. Like, think about it. Your body keeps you alive. Your body does so much for you, but for most of your life, you have been taught to see your body as an enemy, as something that you have to fight or something that you have to control. And like, truthfully, that's really unfair to our bodies. And no judgment here, because I used to be that person. And I think of what I made my body go through especially when I had my eating disorder and underfed it and overtrained it. And it communicated with me in the way of losing my hair and losing my period and being tired all the time and my hormones being all out of whack. And I think of how terribly I treated this home that I had, like this thing that allows me to walk and allows me to be strong and to hug the people I love, and this like really beautiful thing. So when you're in this conscious learning phase, you get to be reacquainted with your home, with your body that is constantly trying to communicate with you, but that you've been ignoring for so long. This is also when you start making peace with food by giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. So this is where you start getting rid of the good and bad labels, and you start to see food as food. And what I always explain inside the program is that I'm not saying that an apple has the same nutritional qualities as a chocolate bar, for example. But what I'm saying is that all foods are morally the same. So foods have different functions. A sandwich, for example, like a really hefty sandwich, its function will be to nourish your body and to give it the fuel and the energy that you need. Whereas maybe a donut is going to have a function of just being delicious and tasting amazing. And even if two foods have different functions, they're all good. They're all necessary. They're all important to your life. Think of like in your own life, different things have different functions. Your function when you're going to work is to pay the bills. It is to be, a contribution to society. It's to help people. Whereas when you're resting, when you're on the weekends, when you're taking time away from work, that time is not wasted. That time is not unnecessary. It's actually necessary in order to be productive at work, in order to show up and to fill your cup and to be your best self. Because if you worked 24/7, you would burn out. And if you rested 24/7, you probably would have a hard time paying the bills. So different function does not mean that one is good or bad. And often, and you start seeing this in stage 2, when you are constantly trying to avoid or cut out those foods that you seem as quote unquote bad, you're actually just setting yourself up for overeating and guilt and this very tumultuous up and down roller coaster relationship with food. So during this step is when you also learn to let go of this guilt-induced overeating, and you start to discover satisfaction with food. So if you've ever dieted, then you probably have experienced this where you're always eating, or most of the time you're eating because it's what you should be doing, and you've lost sight of what's important with eating, which is pleasure and satisfaction. I'll give you an example. When I struggled with disordered eating, I didn't eat pasta because carbs in my mind were bad. So instead, I would have zucchini noodles. But what would happen is I would eat my zucchini noodle pasta, but it wasn't satisfying for me because that's not what I actually wanted. What I wanted was real pasta. So what ends up happening is you eat and you eat and you eat, and you're hoping to feel satisfied, but you only end up feeling full. And there's a difference between being full and being satisfied. So when you start to rediscover satisfaction with eating, you think about food less in between meals because you actually were satisfied when you eat, and you actually end up needing less food because you're not constantly looking for that satisfaction factor in more and more food. So this is where you learn to reconnect to your body. So you learn to understand what patterns of eating feel good for you. You learn to honor your hunger. And it's also very normal in this stage if you find it hard to honor and respect your fullness, because it takes time to experiment with the quantity and the types of food that are going to be satisfying and pleasurable for you. So this is something that's important, is in the second step, if you feel like you're still eating past fullness, if you feel like you still have some discomfort and you still overeat, I want you to know that this is perfectly normal. You're not doing anything wrong, and this is normal in this stage. This is really important for you to understand. At this stage, if you have been eating emotionally, you might start to notice that some of the feelings that you used to numb or distract yourself from with food, you start to feel them a little bit more. And again, I want you to know that this is completely normal, and it's actually a good thing. Your feelings are meant to be felt, because when you push them down with food, it doesn't make them go away. All it does is it distracts you from it temporarily, but then they come rushing back up. And what happens when we ignore a problem? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time until it eventually explodes. Imagine that your toilet is overflowing, and instead of being like, okay, let's take care of this now before it makes a mess, you just shut the door and walk away, and you're like, oh, I'm just not going to take care of that. And you leave the house, and then you come back later and it's everywhere. It's a mess. And now there's mold everywhere. Like, just think of the disaster. That's really what happens when you don't learn how to cope and navigate your hard emotions. So during this stage is when you also might experience the honeymoon phase that I talked about before, where foods that used to be off limits now seem more exciting for you simply because you've gone so long without it. A really good example of this is even when I was now an intuitive eater, this was probably 2 years ago at this point. I was an intuitive eater. I had a very healthy relationship with food, but I got COVID. And I got COVID, and I had this like really deep craving for this specific snack that I'm in love with. They're Snyder's honey mustard pretzel bites. And I had this craving for them. And I went from store to store to store and couldn't for the life of me find them. And I was so upset. And eventually one day I walk into the store and they have them. And because I had gone so long thinking about them, wanting them, The second I brought them home, I ate a large quantity, and that bag was done within like 2 days. And this happened simply because in my mind, they were special because I couldn't find them anywhere. So now every time I go to a store and I see that they're there, I buy them. I buy them to remind me that this food is not going anywhere. It's not the type of thing where like eat as much as you can now, because who knows when's the next time you're going to be able to find them again. And now I have no problem just literally having a tiny handful every here and there. And I can keep that bag in my pantry for weeks. And that's simply because I've gone rid of that like specialness around the food. So if you're experiencing the honeymoon phase at this point, don't beat yourself up. It's completely normal. It's usually this stage that's the hardest to get past if you're doing this on your own without support. And I think of one of our FFA members, Janet. She wrote this really sweet thing about her time in the program. And she said, when I first started, I was so skeptical about the change that could happen. I actually called Sabrina a couple of weeks in and said, I don't think I can do this, and asked for my money back. Thankfully, she was able to encourage me to continue. And obviously, I just want to say a side note, like I encouraged her because I knew what would be possible for her. So she decided to keep going. And she said, I'm so happy that she did, because I'm getting stronger mentally and have realized that my relationship with food was toxic. Now I eat when I want, what I want, and don't feel guilty if I have fun foods. Funniest thing is, you start to realize that the food that makes you feel good, you go towards more and more. And that's what's so great about it. Now, I don't eat a full bag of chips. I have a few and I'm satisfied knowing that I can have more if I like. I'm happier and more focused on the important things in life, like having fun with my children. Trust me, it is so worth it. So if at this stage you're like, oh my God, I don't know if this is worth it, I don't know if I should do this, like keep remembering what your why is. Why this is so important to you and your values, because this is really going to get you to keep moving forward, even if it feels uncomfortable. So then we move on to stage 3, which is crystallization, and what I fondly call the turning point. And I call it the turning point because this is usually when you start to fully embrace, trust, and believe in the process because you're experiencing it. So this is where you truly start to experience the awakenings of your true intuitive eater inside that has been buried under years of dieting and food rules. So your thoughts about food are no longer on your mind 24/7. And this is where you are able to drive the car without being hyper aware. You can talk to people, so you don't have to have this like hyper consciousness about what you're eating and what your body is sending you. So now you're making food choices based on what your body is telling you. And your biological signals are mostly intuitive. And this is where you start to experience this like strong sense of trust around food. Because you're able to trust your body, you're able to trust yourself, and you've been practicing giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. You now know that you can eat what you really want, and you can also trust your body to tell you when it's full, when it's hungry, and when it feels satisfied. You're also continuing to make peace with food. So inside the program, this is where we're working through your food rules. We're bringing some foods back in that in the past you probably felt uncomfortable around, and you're learning to have really positive experiences with these foods. For example, one of my clients, her quote unquote weak food was Cadbury mini eggs, and it was around Easter. So I took her through one of the exercises that we have inside of the program to be able to have a positive experience with that food, which means sitting down with it, enjoying the heck out of it, being present and not overeating it, and being able to show herself that this isn't a food that has control over her, that this isn't a quote unquote weak or binge food. So she did it, and she comes back a week later and comes on our coaching calls, and she was like, I can't believe it. I've had bags of mini eggs in my house and I have barely touched them, and I haven't been thinking about them. So you're having these like light bulb moments of, wow, this food might not be as quote unquote bad or weak or addictive as I thought it would be. And this is where we also teach you how to know the difference between your biological hunger and your emotional hunger. So now you're able to know, okay, am I wanting to eat because I'm feeling emotional, or is my body really asking for food? And this is where we get in the realm of body image healing as well. And you're starting to understand that your set point weight is something that you will achieve when you are eating intuitively, when you have a healthy relationship with food. And that if you are over your natural weight, or if your natural weight has increased over time, it's not because you're weak. It's not because of a lack of willpower. It's a byproduct. It's a result of dieting. So moving on to stage 4. Stage 4 is the intuitive eater awakens. So you are what I call now a confident eater. So this is where you are really confident in listening to your body, and you are able to eat the foods that you really want because you know that they're not being taken away, that there isn't some diet around the corner. So now you're able to have a piece of chocolate and not need to eat the entire chocolate bar. You're able to have one cookie and walk away. For example, one of our current FFA members was telling us a win this week that it was her birthday. And normally in the past, if someone brought her like a birthday cake or a sweet for her birthday, she would get this like internal panic because she would want to eat it, but she didn't want to eat it. She didn't want to allow herself to eat it. And then she would feel bad about saying that she can't eat it. And this time around, none of that happened. She just thought, okay, it's my birthday and I can have this food whenever I want, and it's not bad for me to have it. So she decided to cut it in pieces for everyone to be able to share. She had 2 quarters, so the equivalent of half a cookie, ate it and was satisfied and didn't need to go for more and didn't lose control and didn't overeat because she no longer has this deprivation, this guilt, and this anxiety around food. And this is also where you might find yourself starting to choose healthier foods, not because you should, but because you feel physically better, you feel good, you feel energetic, you feel vitality when you eat that way. So now you're making these healthier choices from a place of true desire. The intention behind it is completely different than when you were dieting. And so this is what I really want you to understand, because there's like this massive misconception that if I become an intuitive eater, it's going to ruin my health. I'm going to gain all this weight. I'm going to be unhealthy. I'm going to develop diseases. Like your brain will literally go to the worst case scenario. But the truth is that when you've made peace with food and you've learned how to listen to your body, then you're going to notice that you actually gravitate towards healthier food. For example, one of our members was telling us how she randomly started craving broccoli and avocado, which never, ever happened in the past while she was dieting. Because now it's not like she feels like she has to eat certain foods, but it's also not like when she's presented with a chocolate bar or with a donut, she has to jump on it at every occasion because it's like, this is the last time or the only time I'm going to be able to eat this. So now all foods are equal. They're on the same step. There's not one higher or better than the other. And so you get to make choices that make you feel your best. This is really a fun stage because you enjoy food so much more because now you're eating mindfully, you're eating intentionally, there's no more guilt, you're really present with it. So the joy of food is back and you're no longer seeing food as like this enemy. And because your experiences around food are so pleasant, because you're not losing control, you're not beating yourself up, you just experience so much more happiness and freedom around food. When it comes to emotional eating, if coping with your emotions used to be really difficult and you turn to food every time, you're going to be less and less scared of feeling them, of embracing them, of sitting with them, of working through them. And you're going to develop what I call inside the program this emotional toolkit. So all of these different coping mechanisms that are going to benefit your well-being, both physically and emotionally, so that food is not your only or your primary coping mechanism. And talking about body image, this is when you've stopped being angry, being a bully to your body, and picking out every flaw and beating yourself up. You start to respect it and understand that all people come in all shapes and sizes and experience a lot more compassion and kindness towards yourself and towards your body. Okay, we're almost there, my friend. We're at the final stage, which is treasure the pleasure. At this point, you are an intuitive eater. So this is where you fully trust your body's intuitive abilities. It is easy. It is natural to honor your hunger, to respect when you're full. You're barely or not at all overeating. You don't feel any guilt about your food choices, your portions. You're not questioning yourself. You have so much confidence and peace around eating. And you know that even when stressful and emotional situations arise, you're not dependent on food. You have the tools, you have the skills, you have the capabilities to handle them in a way that will benefit your well-being. So you learn how to deal with those feelings. And as a result, if we go back to what we were talking about when you ignore problem, you're bringing light to the problems as they happen. You're working through them immediately. So they're no longer compounding over time. And this benefits all areas of your life. We haven't really talked about exercise, but now at this point, exercise is something that you do and that you use for true joy, for pleasure, for feeling good, for feeling energetic. It's not about burning calories or losing weight or this diet culture bullshit. And when we're talking about what happens to your weight and your body, this is when your weight has settled into what is natural and healthy for you. So this is where you settle at your set point weight, a place that's comfortable and appropriate for your height, your body. And it's no longer this constant yo-yo cycle between losing and gaining. And this is where you're protected from diet culture. Someone can make a comment about what you've eaten or about the way that you look, and it doesn't faze you. Your armor against diet culture is thick, it is protective, and you are free from dieting, and you can eat intuitively. You have a healthy relationship with food, with your body, with exercise. And as someone who is now an intuitive eater, I can tell you that it is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself. It truly has changed my life, all areas of my life, my career, my relationships, my family, my mental health, my physical health, everything. So becoming an intuitive eater, I had to go through all of those stages. And it is so worth it. So you don't have to go at it alone. You don't have to try to figure it out and try to duct tape some pieces together. In my free 3-day intuitive eating challenge, I'm walking you through it. I'm giving you the 4 puzzle pieces that you need in order to get to this stage 5. These are the things that I needed. These are the things that I've taught every single one of my clients inside Food Freedom Academy, and I'm sharing it with you. I'm giving you some of the most powerful strategies and tools and mindsets in order for you to be successful on this journey. So If you don't want to do this alone and you want to have free guidance, an amazing community, coaching from me, then I would love to see you on the inside of the challenge. You can go to the show notes to find the link to join. Whether you've done one of my challenges before or not, you are welcome. You are encouraged to join. There's going to be new material, new trainings, new content, and this is truly the best one I've created yet. I've revamped it. I'm so excited for it. So sabrinamaya.com/challenge. Find the link in the show notes. Get in there. Save your spot. We start tomorrow, May 9th. I can't wait to see you on the inside. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.